The water didn't disappear. It betrayed you. You stood there, hose in hand, watching it happen again. A dark patch spread across the soil, thick and promising, then gone. Not absorbed, not held, just vanished, as if something beneath the surface rejected it, as if the earth itself had learned how to lie. Day after day you repeated the ritual: pour, wait, hope. And still, your plants whispered the same quiet accusation through curled leaves and brittle stems. We are thirsty. Not for water, but for something you never gave them. Because what if the problem was never how much you watered, but where the water went? And what if everything you've been taught about watering properly was built on a misunderstanding so deep, so normalized, that you stopped questioning it entirely? Step closer. Not to the garden, but beneath it. There's a different world down there. Silent, layered, strategic. And if you've never seen it, you've been gardening blind. This channel exists to reveal what was buried, sometimes literally. So if you're ready to unlearn what's costing your soil its life, subscribe now and stay with me. Because what I buried next to my plants wasn't fertilizer. It was a hollow piece of bamboo. And what happened underground changed everything. Before we dig into what was buried, you need to confront something far more unsettling than dry soil or weak plants. You need to confront the illusion of moisture. From above, the ground looks obedient, darkened, softened, alive. But beneath that thin, deceptive layer, the physics begin to betray you. Water doesn't behave the way most gardeners imagine. It doesn't gently seep downward, nourishing every root along the way like a slow-moving gift. It rushes, it escapes, it follows gravity with indifference, slipping past the zones where roots actually live and disappearing into depths that your plants will never reach. This is not hydration. This is loss. Soil, despite how it appears, is not a sponge. It is a fractured architecture of particles, air pockets, and invisible channels. Some of these channels are wide, allowing water to drain quickly. Others are narrow, capable of holding moisture through capillary tension. But when you flood the surface, you overwhelm this structure. The larger pores dominate. Water bypasses the finer matrix where retention happens. It plunges downward, carrying nutrients with it, leaving behind a surface that looks wet but is functionally starving. What your plants need is not saturation. They need access. Roots do not chase water the way you might think. They do not dive endlessly into the abyss. They spread, horizontally, strategically. They grow where conditions are stable, where moisture is consistent, where oxygen still exists. Because this is the paradox most people miss. Roots suffocate in overly wet soil. They require both water and air, a delicate balance that surface watering routinely destroys. Now imagine a different pathway, not from above, but from within. When water is introduced below the surface, something extraordinary happens. The soil is no longer overwhelmed. Instead, moisture begins to move outward and upward through capillary action. It spreads slowly, evenly, drawn by the natural tension between soil particles. This creates a stable zone of hydration, not a fleeting flood, but a sustained presence. Roots detect this consistency. They migrate toward it. They cluster around it. They anchor themselves in a space where survival is no longer a gamble. This is not just irrigation. This is communication. You are signaling to the plant, the resources you need are here, not scattered, not unreliable, here. And the plant responds. Its root system reorganizes. Instead of remaining shallow and vulnerable, it deepens its network around this internal reservoir. It becomes less dependent on surface conditions, less exposed to evaporation, less reactive to heat waves or inconsistent watering schedules. The plant stops panicking. It starts stabilizing. But there's something even more precise happening inside that hidden zone. When water is delivered through a porous structure, something organic, something textured, it doesn't rush. It seeps. It breathes into the soil. The surrounding particles absorb it gradually, maintaining that fragile balance between moisture and oxygen. Microorganisms, the unseen engineers of soil health, begin to thrive in this environment. Bacteria, fungi, and microfauna activate. They decompose organic matter, release nutrients, and create microscopic highways that further regulate water distribution. You're no longer just watering a plant. You're activating an ecosystem. And this is where the bamboo enters, not as a tool, but as a conduit. Bamboo is not inert. Its internal fibers, its segmented structure, its natural porosity, they transform it into a slow-release vessel. When buried beside a plant and filled with water, it doesn't dump moisture into the soil. It leaks it, gently, persistently, like a controlled heartbeat beneath the surface. No flooding, no waste, no illusion. Just a quiet, continuous exchange between water, soil, and root. And once you understand this, the entire act of gardening begins to feel primitive, almost careless in its traditional form. Because standing above the soil, spraying water downward, hoping it reaches the roots, it's not just inefficient, it's blind. The truth is, plants were never meant to rely on surface generosity. In nature, water infiltrates slowly. It seeps from organic matter. It lingers in pockets. It moves with patience. The systems that sustain life underground are subtle, precise, and brutally unforgiving to excess. So when you bury something as simple as a hollow bamboo tube, you are not adding complexity. You are restoring intelligence. Long before hoses hissed across suburban lawns and plastic irrigation systems carved geometric certainty into the soil, there was a quieter intelligence at work, one that didn't force water into the earth, but invited it to stay. And like many forms of quiet intelligence, it didn't survive the rise of convenience. There are fragments of it scattered across cultures, often misinterpreted, often dismissed as primitive improvisation. In parts of Southeast Asia, farmers once buried hollow plant stalks near young crops, not as decoration, not as ritual, but as a deliberate channel. In arid regions of Central America, similar principles appeared in clay vessels known as ollas, porous containers sunk into the soil, slowly releasing water directly where roots could find it. In regions of China, early agricultural texts described methods of subsurface hydration using natural materials, including bamboo, to guide moisture into the ground rather than across it. These were not isolated accidents. They were solutions shaped by observation. But observation doesn't scale well in a world addicted to speed. When industrial agriculture began to dominate, it brought with it a new kind of logic, one that prioritized volume over precision. Water became something to apply, not something to understand. Irrigation systems were designed for coverage, for uniformity, for control. The idea of placing a quiet, buried conduit beside each plant didn't fit the model. It wasn't efficient at scale. It didn't sell equipment. It didn't justify pipelines or pumps or endless rows of sprinklers misting water into the air, where much of it would evaporate before ever touching the soil. And so, it was sidelined. Not erased completely, just pushed to the margins. Rebranded as traditional, labeled as low-tech, treated as a relic of a time before modern solutions. But there's another layer to this disappearance, one that feels less accidental. Because once you understand how subsurface watering works, something uncomfortable begins to surface. It reveals how much water is wasted through conventional methods. It exposes the inefficiency built into systems that rely on surface saturation. And inefficiency, when it's profitable, has a way of protecting itself. The global irrigation industry is vast. It thrives on the idea that more water, applied more frequently, is the answer. It thrives on dependency, on timers, on pressure systems, on constant input, a method that reduces water usage, that decentralizes control, that allows a single gardener to maintain soil hydration with minimal waste, doesn't align with that narrative. So the knowledge lingers, but quietly, passed between small communities, rediscovered by individuals who question why their soil never seems to hold what they give it, occasionally resurfacing in drought-stricken regions where necessity forces people to rethink everything, and then, just as quickly, fading again beneath the noise of more advanced solutions. The bamboo tube is not new. That's what makes it unsettling. It suggests that the problem was never a lack of innovation. It was a loss of attention, a shift in priorities, a willingness to trade understanding for convenience, because burying something like bamboo next to your plants doesn't look like progress. It doesn't feel like technology. It feels almost too simple, too quiet, too easy to overlook. But simplicity has a way of surviving where complexity collapses. And if you trace the pattern carefully, you begin to see it not as an outdated trick, but as a suppressed philosophy, one that refuses to dominate the soil, and instead learns how to work with its hidden systems, which raises a question that's harder to ignore than dry leaves or wasted water. If this method has existed for centuries, and if it works, then why were you never taught to use it? You don't begin with the bamboo. You begin with a pause. Stand beside your plant before you touch the soil. Look at it, not as something you maintain, but as something negotiating for survival beneath a surface you rarely consider. The leaves tell you part of the story, but the real conversation is happening below, in a space you've never seen. Now, step closer. The soil should be slightly dry on top, not cracked, not lifeless, just no longer pretending to be wet. This matters because what you're about to create is not a replacement for watering. It's a redefinition of where water belongs. Take your bamboo, not polished, not treated, raw, hollow, and imperfect, about the thickness of your thumb, maybe wider. The length should be enough to reach below the root zone and still rise slightly above the surface, just enough for you to access it. Hold it in your hand for a moment. Feel its weight, its texture, the faint ridges along its surface. This is not plastic. It breathes differently. It behaves differently. Now, push it into the soil. Not violently, not with force. Twist gently as you press downward, allowing the earth to open around it rather than collapse. You're not drilling. You're negotiating entry. The bamboo slides past the top layer, through the loose particles, until it reaches the deeper zone where the soil becomes cooler, denser, quieter. This is where it stays. Once placed, pull it up slightly, just enough to ensure the bottom opening isn't sealed by compacted dirt. You want a pathway, not a blockage. Around it, press the soil back gently. Seal the edges, but don't suffocate the structure. The bamboo should feel anchored, but not trapped. Now comes the moment most people rush. Don't. Pour the water slowly. Watch how it disappears, not across the surface, but into the bamboo itself. There's no splash, no runoff, no illusion of saturation. Just a quiet descent, a vertical movement into a space you can't see. Wait, this is where the shift happens. Beneath the surface, the water begins to leak outward through the natural pores and microfractures of the bamboo. It doesn't flood the roots. It approaches them. Slowly, patiently. It creates a sphere of moisture that expands over time, not minutes. And as it expands, the roots begin to respond, not immediately, not dramatically, but with subtle direction. They move toward it. You won't see this part, but you'll see what follows. Days pass. The surface remains drier than you're used to. It feels wrong at first. You'll want to spray to compensate, to return to what feels safe. Resist that impulse. Instead, return to the bamboo. Touch it. Lift the cap of air above it. Pour again, but only when it asks for it, when the soil around it begins to cool less, when the plant's leaves shift from tension to quiet demand. You are no longer watering the surface. You are feeding a center. And then, slowly, the evidence begins to accumulate. The leaves stop curling. Not dramatically, but consistently. Their color deepens, not a forced green, but a stable one. The soil, when you dig lightly near the base, reveals something unexpected. Moisture, not at the top, but where it matters. Cool, retained, alive. A man named Daniel in New Mexico tried this during a season that should have broken his garden. Weeks without rain, temperatures pressing past what his soil could normally tolerate. He buried simple bamboo segments beside his tomatoes, not out of belief, but out of exhaustion. He filled them every few days, nothing more. By the end of that month, while neighboring plots shriveled and collapsed under the same sun, his plants stood, not untouched, but functioning, producing, holding on in a way that didn't make sense unless you looked beneath the surface. In Northern California, A woman named Elise adapted the method for her raised beds. She used slightly wider bamboo tubes, placing them between clusters of herbs. What she noticed wasn't just survival, it was reduction. Her water usage dropped by nearly half, not through restriction, but through precision. She wasn't giving less, she was losing less. And that's the difference most people never measure, not how much you pour, but how much stays. This method doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't require schedules or systems or calculations. It asks for something far less comfortable: attention. Because once you've placed that bamboo into the soil, you've created a relationship, not between you and the plant, but between you and the unseen. You've inserted a point of access into a hidden world, and every time you pour water into it, you're choosing to trust processes you can't directly observe. That trust is where most people stop. But if you stay with it, if you allow the soil to respond, if you resist the urge to interfere too quickly, you begin to notice something subtle, something almost unsettling. The garden starts needing you less. At some point, the bamboo stops feeling like a tool. It becomes a question. Because what you buried wasn't just a hollow tube. It was an interruption, a quiet refusal to keep doing something the way you were taught, simply because it was familiar. And once that interruption takes root, it doesn't stay confined to the garden, it spreads. You start noticing how often effort is mistaken for effectiveness, how easily we trust what is visible over what is true. Water on the surface looks like care. It feels like action. It satisfies the instinct to do something, to intervene, to prove that we are involved. But beneath that performance, there's often waste, silent, normalized, unexamined. The bamboo challenges that instinct. It asks you to work with systems you cannot see, to trust outcomes that unfold slowly, to accept that the most important transformations are rarely dramatic. And that's where most people falter, not because the method is difficult, but because it contradicts a deeper habit: control. We've been conditioned to believe that control means applying more force, more input, more frequency, more water, more nutrients, more intervention. But the soil doesn't respond to control. It responds to balance, to timing, to placement. It responds to intelligence, not intensity. And once you experience that shift, even in something as small as a garden bed, it becomes harder to ignore everywhere else. How many systems in your life are you flooding from the surface, hoping something essential absorbs what it needs? How much energy is being poured into places where it was never designed to stay? The truth is, most failures are not the result of neglect. They're the result of misdirection, too much in the wrong place. The bamboo reveals a different philosophy, one where less is not sacrifice, but precision, where you stop trying to reach everything and instead focus on reaching the right thing, where you accept that real change happens below the threshold of visibility, in layers that don't announce themselves. But there's a warning hidden in this, one that most people overlook. Once you see it, you can't go back. You can't unsee the waste. You can't unknow the difference between appearance and function. And that means the old methods, the ones built on surface-level thinking, start to feel not just ineffective, but irresponsible. Because now, it's no longer ignorance, it's choice. And that choice will define more than your garden. There are deeper systems beneath everything we interact with: soil, water, food, even knowledge itself. Systems that reward those who take the time to understand them and quietly punish those who don't. The bamboo is just an entry point, a simple object that reveals a much larger truth: that the world is not sustained by what is obvious. It is sustained by what is hidden. In the next video, we're going deeper into that hidden layer, into a method that doesn't just deliver water more intelligently, but transforms the soil into something that can hold life in ways most people have never experienced. A method so effective, it was dismissed as myth for decades. Until now, stay observant, stay skeptical, and remember, what you can't see is usually where everything begins.